Okay, so now the next thing we got to do is we got to assemble a rack. Call it the rack, the pistons, rod assembly that go in the motor. It's a rack of pistons. You're going to see I got a couple of different versions sitting right here in front of us. The alcohol piston is to your right and the nitro piston is to your left. Well, the first big differences that you can see is the coating. Nitro pistons have this hard anodized coating on them. The reason why is because they need that for the initial lubrication on the sleeve. Nitromethane has a tendency, and it sounds hard to believe that anodizing is a lubrication, but it's a hardened surface, so it doesn't gall against the sleeve. An alcohol piston doesn't need that. Back in the 70s and 80s, up into the early 90s, nitro guys used to put these little buttons, Teflon buttons on the skirts, because nitromethane, not only is it something that dissolves your bank account, it also dissolves, breaks down solvents, oil. So it needs a little bit of lubrosity, a little bit of a release there on the sleeve. So that's what the difference is there between the two. The other thing you're going to see here is the wrist pin. This wrist pin is quite a bit thicker. The wall thickness is considerably more than you're going to see with the alcohol piston. The alcohol pin, wrist pins, they don't need to be quite as stout because the cylinder pressures aren't as much, and they also lighten the reciprocating mass up, so it allows, alcohol motors, they like to run up, the new screw-blown motors, they'll run up to 11,000 RPM. So when you're trying to sling that much mass, you need to have a little bit less. And in this injected nitro combination, we're only gonna spin it at about 68,000 at the most. 6,800, I mean. So if I go to 68,000, well, then we really have some interesting things going on. So we got a brand new set of CP Carillo pistons and some GRP rods. Thanks to the guys at GRP for those rods, and thanks Brian for building me this custom piston. I use a stage 2 Allen Johnson fuel head, so it has a 174 chamber. That's why the dome of the piston looks so big. We're shooting for right at about somewhere in the neighborhood of 12 and a half to 12 3/4 compression, depending upon which head gasket. So I already got the rings all cut. That's done. So now I'm just going to go ahead and assemble it. And when you assemble, you always need to have a frosty cold beverage, and that's why we like to thank the folks at Miller Lite for supplying the frosty cold beverage. And once again, the D. Loney V8 channel for keeping that frosty cold beverage frosty and cold. So I'm going to put some of this together, and we'll talk. Okay, so I did the tedious stuff and got most of the racks, all but one left to go. So I wanted to kind of give a quick discussion about this one. When you need to put this together, you need to be very careful. This has a chamfer. You're going to see that there is a chamfer on that edge. The other side is flat. That runs up against the fillet in the crankshaft. And that usually goes, I put that with the intake valve down when I assemble this thing, because the way the rack orientates, that always makes sure you have your intake valve in the right location on the Hemi, up and exhaust down, as we all know. On the rings, lots of people have different ideas about it. Here's your oil control rings, your second ring, and your top ring. So top ring, these are Ackerley and Childs, are really good rings. I don't know if you can see it here very well. You can't probably. It's a little bit of a ledge there. See a little bit of a scrape. That goes up. Really important on the second one, you've got to do the dot up. If you do the dot down, it's gonna, because the ring actually has a bevel to scrape, and it'll push and it'll pump the oil up, and it'll just smoke oil. And then of course you've got your oil rings. The way I like to do it is I like to put the gap here down at the bottom, and then I put the gap top and bottom rails, I put them at the wrist pins, so they're 180 degrees apart away from that way it doesn't stack up. And then these guys, we'll rack those, we'll arrange those when we assemble it, slide it in there through the slammer. I like to put them 90 degrees apart. So I'm gonna put this one together. Got my wonderful Torco assembly oil. As you can see, it looks like a bloody massacre that's happened. But this stuff, you gotta, lubrication's your friend, as we all know. So, all right, bye. One last thing to talk about on this that I didn't go over with everybody is that all these rings, these Acrolean Childs, are file to fit. We cut them, they come in close, but you still have to cut the ring gap in it. Nitro motors, we need a little bit more ring gap because of the temperature, what you see. So you don't want those rings to butt ends and chip them. It'll lock up, it'll get bound up in the ring lands. So right there we got some good, about 35 thousandths. I got 30. This one's actually measured in at about 34. So we're right there at about where we need to be for that.